What's up, Sons of Gondor, and welcome to a very interesting comparison between two very interesting balisongs that sit in a very fascinating place in the community, being both beginner-focused and not crazy expensive, from the same company. And me being somebody that makes money from the sale of this product and doesn't make money from the sale of this product, but I am affiliated with Nabalis. But these being beginner focused and me being more on the beginner spectrum of flipping in general in terms of my ability to flip and the tricks I can do and all of that kind of fun stuff, I thought that this would be a fun topic for me to dive into today. So I wanted to talk about where these exist in the market, which one I think is better, why comparing balisongs in general is very difficult, and why comparing specifically these two is extra difficult. And I say that as somebody that regularly reviews balisongs, or at least assists in the review of different balisongs. So, of course, take all this with a grain of salt, or any opinion I have, or really any opinion anyone has in the balisong hobby about any balisong with a grain of salt, because these are very difficult to compare. And the balisong hobby is so subjective in so many different ways. You're not really measuring a lot of objective facts whenever it comes to the question of how does something flip, because we all flip very differently in different ways for different reasons. So that's why I thought that this was such a fascinating thing to cover, and why it's taking me 3 attempts to properly cover everything that I want to cover. So this is my 3rd attempt recording this video, and I've actually spent multiple extra weeks preparing for it and really gathering my thoughts on the Vulp versus the Canyon, because they're so interesting, and I think it just opens up such a fascinating discussion about where somebody should start in this hobby and whether different places are a good starting point or not. So buckle up, because this is going to be a fun one. The Canyon. We'll start there. The Canyon really fascinated me. I was actually on a month-long trip to New Zealand when this was both announced and released. And I hadn't seen it before, despite how close we are with Nabalis. I haven't actually, I don't know a ton about everything they're developing outside of the Vulp, and of course now exists the Vulp Pro. I'm not super privy to everything they have going on, except for the things that we're directly affiliated with them with. So whenever I saw the Canyon, I thought it was absolutely beautiful, and I really wanted to try one. And I saw the response that it was getting in the community and how many people were so excited to try it, and they thought that it looked good. This acid wash one in particular is really cool looking, to me at least. So I was really, really excited to try it, but of course, me being in the position that I am, and not only making money from the sale of the Vulp, but also just having the affiliation that I do, and making money, and a sizable amount of my income comes from sales of the Vulp. So I say all that, of course, just to clarify any biases I might have. But I have tried to set myself aside from that as best as I can. That's where I've taken these extra couple weeks to really feel out how I actually feel about all of this, trying to set myself aside from any affiliation that I have. So seeing the Canyon come out and being really excited for it, and seeing the price point of $40 for the trainer and $50 for the false live blade, and being on a bushing pivot system, and made entirely of stainless steel except for the washers, made that a very, very interesting thing, because stainless steel balisongs are generally not very good at flipping. We've seen that with pretty much every single one of them that have come out, even stuff like the Kershaw Lucha, which has kind of been the stainless steel king for a while. That is about 6 ounces compared to the standard 4 to 4.5 ounces that most balisongs on the market tend to hover around, or at least most of the popular ones. So the Lucha, being made of stainless steel, has made it very interesting, and why I don't enjoy flipping the stock version of that almost at all. So when the Canyon was using stainless steel, that seemed really interesting to me, but of course made me kind of sweat a little bit because, the sales of the Vulp are important for Will and I's income. And so naturally, I got a little weary about, oh boy, the Vulp, which has sold thousands and thousands and thousands of units at this point, and has generally been considered the best starting point for people getting into the hobby. It's been a year and a half since it came out, and perhaps has aged for some people not as gracefully as it has for others. But it's like, if there's a new budget king in town, first, let me say, that's awesome. More affordable options in the community are always going to be a win, especially if they're good and they're ethically sourced and they're not clones. And these are not clones. They're not even really close to clones. And so there being more affordable options is a huge win. But naturally, I started to sweat a little bit. So that's what made me really interested in getting to finally flip them. So then whenever I did get a chance to finally flip it, that's when I really started to dive into how I actually feel about them. So before we get into my feelings, let's just go over some general specifications. The Canyon is made of all stainless steel. I'll actually start with the trainer here. The Canyon is made of all stainless steel and has, like I said, a bushing pivot system. It doesn't have Zen pins, if you don't know what those are. Zen pins are just any pin fitted into the handles themselves, so that the handles hit it and give you a good handle gap. This has no pins, which is a durability concern for sure, which we will get into in a little bit, but that means that it's just the handles and the blade whacking each other, which, depending on the construction of the material, can lead to the handle gap reducing over time, which, spoiler alert, there are some signs of that happening on both of these models, just in the relatively, I guess, a little over a month now that we've been flipping them actively. But we'll get into that. But overall, the Canyon, I think the design is really, really cool. The way it melds the actual name Canyon and gives the geographical feature of a canyon is implemented into this in a lot of really cool ways, especially this handle pattern here. And just the general flow of it, especially the live blade, just little accents like here. It's really cool, and I think it's a really well designed thing from a look standpoint. The design in terms of how that affects the flipping is something we'll get into later. But the trainer starts at $40, and the false live blade starts at $50. The Vulp has 6061 aluminum for handles and 420C, I believe, steel blade, and has Zen pins, of course, and also a bushing pivot system. So both of these are relatively easy to maintain and tune, assuming that the bushings are well tuned out of the factory, which generally for this cheaper stuff is going to be hit or miss no matter what the product is, because, spoiler alert, these are cheap for a reason, and you have to cut corners in various areas, and we'll get into where some of those cut corners might affect things. But as for the Vulp, you of course have this pattern that was designed mostly by Will. I actually played a role in the thickness of these, because it was originally just going to be some thin lines, but made them thicker so that the grip was better. And overall, 6061 aluminum is going to be, as a whole, less durable than stainless steel. But this is where we get into some of the property differences. Stainless steel is a cheaper material as a whole, but is in certain ways stronger. The Vulp uses 6061 aluminum, which is also a relatively cheap material, but it's a little bit different of a ball game than the stainless steel on the Canyon. And so that makes this $65 as the retail starting price, but you can get it as low as about like $52, $53 if you get the blemished version on Nabalis' website, not off of Amazon, but on their website. And their blemish models are usually pretty good. And you will be hard pressed to actually find the blemish with a lot of those. So it can get it as low as that, but it retails for $65. And so in terms of the materials, this is where the comparison immediately gets difficult to break down. Because that's where, like everything I just talked about, you can compare objective differences. You can compare the actual durability of the steel blade on this and the steel blade on that, just from a material standpoint. You can talk about aluminum versus steel and the inherent properties that those come with, and the types of washers being used and the types of bushings being used. All that is objectively measurable in a certain way. But in terms of how that affects the flipping as a whole, that is where it gets a little tricky, and where my opinions on it start to come into play, which have been formulated over the, like, I've spent more time with these than I would, or than I have in previous reviews that I've done on the main Will Hirsch channel, because it's just been such a fascinating topic to dive into, because now the community is talking about which is the better place to start, which is a very valid question, especially since they're in a similar price range. But let's talk about stainless steel. I talked about the Lucha, and the Lucha is a great example of something that can function, but it just makes it really heavy. Stainless steel is a heavy material, and you can see that just in how much material has to be removed for this to be a solid weight. Jumping back real quick into the specifications, the Vulp hovers around, I believe the Vulp is about 3.9 ounces. And the Canyon is about 4.4 to 4.5. And that, truthfully, is very light for a stainless steel balisong. Most hover between the 5 and 6 ounce range, especially if you're looking at, like, especially OG balisong people will know, like, even before the likes of Squid Industries came out, like stuff from Baron's Sons, and stuff like that. Those were often 5-6 ounces, and most were made of stainless steel, because stainless steel is just a cheap material to make stuff out of. And so this being 4.5 ounces is a huge win for sure. But this is where, you know, in terms of the balisong community, you'll have people that will discuss, or like companies will break down the balance profile of different balisongs. Like, they'll put it in handle bias or neutral or blade bias or strong handle bias, slight handle bias. And those can be good at a glance, but ultimately the weight distribution of something is so important in the long run of how something is actually going to flip. It's like, you can have the overall weight of something, but that doesn't truly tell you how it's going to flip. Neither will just saying it has a strong handle bias or something like that. So that's where this gets a little wacky, and the properties of stainless steel kind of come into effect here. They had to remove so much material. This is technically a sandwich construction, but both on the sides of the handles and the front of the handles, they had to remove so much material to get it down to a weight that was going to be good for flipping. And so what that ends up meaning is most of the weight is focused just at the end of the handle here. And the very first thing that I noticed whenever I started flipping it was, which in certain ways can be good, but how much momentum it carries. So much so that it carries a little too much momentum. Ugh. And I specifically feel it when doing most rollovers, but particularly that twirl motion right there. When doing a Champlin, then you give it a twirl, you really feel it like it's coming at you. Like, you feel it even like hit your fingers. And that could be due to the actual weight itself. But that's where I took some extra time in preparing for this and really feeling out how I feel about it. Because the Vulp feels like a 3.9 ounce knife. This feels light because it is light. This feels heavier than what it actually is. Here's a good comparison, an albeit expensive comparison, which I recognize is not going to be the most fair thing in the world. But this is a Fellowship Blades Medusa, which is about the same exact weight. And whenever I flip this, I just feel like it glides through tricks. While still being on the heavier side of what a lot of my balisongs could be, the weight class they fall into. This is still on the heavier side of that, but especially in a twirl, I just really feel it glide through that. Another balisong I feel that on, which is about the same weight, is my V1 Crackaracken. And that also has similar weight properties, and this just feels like it just glides through stuff and feels lighter than it is. And I'm someone that generally likes lighter balisongs, so that's where a ton of the subjectivity comes into play. But this, being about the same weight, feels so much quicker and more agile. Is it very fair comparing a $200 and $500+ knife to a $40 thing? No. And I recognize that's not a fair comparison. But the point stands of this feels like, God, even going back to it right now, this feels sluggish to me. Which to certain people in the hobby, especially people that have flipped a lot of balisongs, I think I've been seeing a lot of people enjoying that it's a nice change of pace and that it's different than what they're used to and that it is overall well balanced for most tricks. And so that makes it a different experience than what most people are used to. But, oh my God. Ugh. That twirl, man. Really feeling that there. And so that's where the comparison to the Vulp gets interesting because, again, this feels like the weight that it is. And let me say, the Vulp is not a perfect flipper. This bead blast texture is not the grippiest thing in the world. To get things cheap, you got to cut some corners, and that's one of the, I wouldn't say it's a corner cut, but that's a choice, is that this is a relatively cheap finish to apply to a balisong, but that does make it end up being slippery. In certain ways, this texture, I would say, is objectively pretty grippy, and the jimping for ladder tricks is also like very solid. But you don't have a lot of grip on the sides, and the chaplain experience, while some will say is objectively bad, I don't think it is. I think it's a great place to help people start learning to chaplain, because it rewards wider circles, but it doesn't really grow with you, which is a common complaint with the Vulp, is that it doesn't grow with you super well because certain tricks don't perform very well. But I feel like through most rollover tricks and aerial based stuff, that it performs well in most of those areas. And again, it feels like the weight that it is. And that's where this just starts to get complicated, because you have this thing that feels heavier than it is, and the handles are noticeably thin, which makes it very interesting. And I know I've said that a lot, but I'm doing my best with this unscripted format. It's like if we hold these side by side here, the Vulp isn't by any means, like, doesn't have an abnormal handle size by any means. Very Squid Industries like in the overall size. And you're not going to be able to tell this super well on camera, so that's where this is going to be tough to really show. Let me actually, the trainer would be a better comparison. But these handles are just pretty thin, especially when you look at it from a side angle. So it leaves this weird place of, it feels heavy, and it has thin handles. And that is where it started to form my basis of how I feel about this being a good beginner balisong versus not. As a whole, it's great. Let me get that out of the way. Like, if this were where you're going to start, or if you've already bought one and you're enjoying it, that's great and that's awesome. Nobody should ever give you shit for enjoying something. They can give you context for that enjoyment, or maybe let you know about some of the, either how it was made or how there are better options. But if you're enjoying it, that's great and that's awesome. But I'm looking at this from the perspective of how I would feel if I was a beginner flipper. Like if I go back to 2018 when I actually got into flipping, if I was torn between these two and which one to pick, which one would I pick? And that's where, if you're a beginner and you're currently stuck with that question, honestly, I gotta be frank, it should really just kind of come down to which one you like the look of more. Because you're not gonna know how the different balance points affect the tricks that you do, because you're not going to be that good at many tricks for a long time. And so it's really just about diving in head first and figuring out, what do you actually like? Is this a hobby that you want to even pursue in the first place? So that's where you can look at these two. And of course, the Vulp has a lot of different colors and stuff. So it's like, if it is a specific color that you like, because this level of stuff, like stuff being made by Nabalis, sure, they have a lot of problems, but within this realm, where it's not some shady clone company making it or some random company with some name that changes on a weekly basis on Amazon, like with this kind of stuff, it's going to be quality enough. You're going to be able to get customer support if you need it. So which one do you like the look of more is one of the main things. But if you are more concerned about where you're going to start and how certain things will grow with you through the hobby, that is an important question. And that's where some people say the Vulp doesn't grow with you super well because of the whole chaplain thing, but it's really not. Like, this is still a comfortable chaplain. It just, you have to be a little bit more deliberate in how you flip it. I would argue that the Canyon falls into a similar problem, but on the opposite end. You have these thin handles that have a weight distribution property that means that it's going to kind of fight against you in certain ways. Like if you're really trying to change up your flipping, it's not going to adapt to that super well. And there are very few good stainless steel balisongs. Maybe this represents a new trend of there being more good options in terms of the realm of stainless steel. But here's my biggest problem with starting with the Canyon. The Vulp, no matter what you think of it, and there's going to be a lot of people that disagree with what I say. There's going to be a lot of people that disagree with what anybody says about any balisong. So I recognize that, and that's where I want this to be an open discussion. Leave comments. Let me know what you think about what I think. I would rather people hear my opinion and then check out the comments to get other people's perspective than just to listen to me and then move on and see my voice as the only voice of truth and then get into an argument over that. Because my voice is not true. This is just one guy's opinion. But the Vulp, to me, feels like a better basis in terms of moving up into what better balisongs actually are. If you were to go from something like a Vulp to something, say, like a BB Firefly, if I was in this position and I had started with the Vulp, I would flip the Vulp and be like, okay, that's how this is. And then I would flip a Firefly and be like, oh, this is kind of like my Vulp, but better, is ultimately how that feels. I could say that also about this is a Squiddy AL. This feels, feels very similar to a Vulp, but better. Here's a Squid Trainer V4. Oh yeah, the grip is better. Most of it, the weight distribution properties are the same, but it's just a little bit heavier. But overall, because this material is similar, it has inherent weight distribution properties that are the same. Even stuff that like a Seraph, this being a $700 or $650+ thing, this doesn't feel super foreign to me. So I feel like if someone were to go from a Vulp into something a little bit higher end, they'd be like, oh, okay, that's like the thing I have, but it's so much better. Wow, this is great. Whereas with a Canyon, if someone were to even flip a Canyon, especially when you come down to like this, when you think about stuff like the sound, which some people, I've seen a lot of people really enjoy the sound of the Canyon. It does virtually nothing for me. It's not that I dislike the sound by any stretch of the imagination, but it doesn't get me excited to flip it like a lot of other balisongs do. That's like something whenever I pick up my Seraph, I'll flip it just to listen to the sound, because it's just beautiful. This does nothing for me. This doesn't get me excited to flip it. This doesn't make me be like, ooh, yeah, this is something I want to show people, because listen to that sound. And that's just kind of the nature of stainless steel stuff anyway. And that's a subjective thing. That shouldn't factor into whether it's good or bad. That's just a personal thing for me. But if somebody were to go from a Canyon to something like a Vulp, I know I, certainly back in the day, would have immediately said, oh my gosh, this is so different. Like, this is such a different experience. The feel in the hand, the sound, the way it carries weight. Like, whoa, this is so different. And someone could say the same thing if they started on a Vulp and then flipped a Canyon. And I've definitely seen that's why people are enjoying the Canyon in certain ways, is because it is so different. and someone has actually made a stainless steel balisong that's pretty damn good. Whereas there's a lot of good aluminum balisongs. So that's where, whenever you think about the question of, where would I recommend somebody start? That's where I feel the Vulp is going to be a better foundation as a whole into moving into what most of the market is, which is aluminum or titanium balisongs. Even if you factor in something that falls into like a channel design. This is a Maxxis Serpent Striker V3. This still feels like a similar enough experience to a Vulp that it wouldn't feel super foreign to me if I were to jump from a Vulp to this. Whereas if I started on a Canyon, I feel like it would be a whole long readjustment period, which can also be said for a lot of like the 3D printed plastic options that are out here. Here's a tape flipper calico. I feel that comparing a 3D printed design to a metal design is just always going to be such a difficult comparison, and people directly compare them all the time. But it's just such a hard comparison to make because the experience is just so different. You can do the same tricks. You can learn on a metal balisong and flip on a plastic balisong just fine, but they're just so different. It's kind of like an apples to oranges kind of thing of like, yes, they're both fruits, but my God, is it a different experience? And does that make it a better experience or a worse experience? That's all going to be so entirely subjective just to you and what you think and what you're doing. And the types of tricks that you do, the kind of things that are important to you. That's going to vary for each person. So I'm definitely not saying that that this is as big of a gap between these two as something like a 3D printed balisong to an aluminum balisong would be. But for me, if I'm recommending stuff, again, trying to set myself aside from any bias I have, any financial affiliation, I'm trying to treat this as some random person just came up to me at Blade Show and was like, hey, I have these two balisongs, flip them and tell me what you think. And I have no idea who made them. I've never flipped them before. I've never seen them in my life. This feels like something that is a lot more familiar and almost standard in a way that I would recommend to a beginner over something like a Canyon, just because the Canyon is so different than so many balisongs on the market. Just what I have on my table here right now is like barely a third of the amount of balisongs that I have, both on my wall right here and in my big balisong case. I actually have multiple cases all right here. I have a lot of them. And while I'm, again, not the most amazing flipper, you've been watching me do virtually the same combo over and over and over and over. But that's where is almost an intentional thing on my part to stay in this kind of realm of flipping, because I feel like, especially in terms of Will and I being a duo of content creators, Will can handle the more intense, how does this flip in this trick, how does it do in all these different areas and types of flipping. I can handle, how is it as a beginner? So that's why I wanted to tackle this in the way that I have, and why I think that I would still pick a Vulp, especially just factoring in the pick whichever one you like the look of better, because to me color is very important, and you have purple, orange, pink, teal, green, black, and red and black, and I'm a red and black guy, so that's where, if I were to make this decision unaffiliated with anybody back in 2018 when I got into flipping, I still probably would have picked the Vulp, even though it is more expensive. So that leads us into kind of talking about where the balisong hobby is at in general, because as I said at the beginning, I think it is a huge win having more affordable options on the market. That's why a lot of people celebrated the Vulp, and why it's sold like over 10,000 units now, is because it's not a clone. It's made by a reliable company with a reliable name behind it. And no matter what you think of me or Will or Nabalis or any company or anything like that, just know that the Vulp was a good faith attempt at making a solid balisong that wasn't a clone. And there's been a lot of love and care that was poured into it. Whether that worked for you, that's up to you. And I'm not going to try to argue that. So having more affordable options is great. But Nabalis has been on a very interesting spree of product releases. We had the Vulp Pro release in December of 2023. And then very shortly after that, I don't have it here, they released the Nabalis Wing for pretty much close to the same exact price if you were getting the false live blade version. And then they released the Canyon in February. The Wing came out in January, and then the Canyon in February. And then now they have their Create with Nabalis campaign where they're going to be releasing another mainstay production balisong. And they announced a titanium one too that I would imagine is going to come out in like April or May. And while competition is great, more options is great, I'm started to get concerned, and this is me, somebody that is of course invested in Nabalis pretty heavily, like is starting to get concerning in terms of like, is this the trend we're on? Are we going to be releasing more and more and more, and like every month there's going to be a brand new design? And the reason that this is a concerning thing, because I love having more options, I'm looking at it again from that beginner mindset. It's like if you were to go onto the Nabalis.com website and look at what's available from them, so many of their products are in like the same exact price range. You have the Canyon for $40 to $50, and then you had the Nabalis Lightning for $45, and then the Morse for $50 to $60, and the live blade or the false live blade Canyon for $50, and then the Vulp for $50 to $65, and then the Marvels for $75, and then the Hydra for $90 to $100, and then the Wing for $100 to $120, or up to $140 if you want the live blade. And then you have the Vulp Pro for $140, and then the live blade for $160. And I'm just looking at it from a beginner standpoint of how many options that is to somebody that's never flipped before. And they're looking at all these different options made of different things for different reasons. Most of them are aluminum. But that's going to get even more confusing, especially if Nabalis maintains a near monthly release schedule of brand new, different designs coming out virtually every single month of 2024. I have no idea if that's their plan. Maybe they've just been on a weird streak, and this is the end of that streak. But it doesn't show any signs of slowing down. And that, I think, is going to make it more and more confusing for new people trying to buy some of their products, is because they're going to be presented with so many options right at the gate that it could just get confusing. It's like showing up to a restaurant and instead of having like one or two types of burgers, they have like 20 types of burgers. It's like, okay, that's great. I'm glad there's variety, but my God, that is a lot to choose from. That's a little scary. That's a little daunting. I'm going to have to really sit down and consider this, because there's not just oh, hey, you want this for this price? Here you go. It's, oh, here's 20 options. So as a whole, I'm very happy to have this amount of diversity, especially from so many different companies now. You can get so many different things. And that's not just a Nabalis problem. Squid Industries is actually, that's some criticism that I have for them is, they have so many. Where's my boy? Where did I put it? Oh boy, I'm looking for my sword. There it is. It's hiding under all my shit. You have stuff like the Squid Trainer V4 for $175, and the Swordfish for $175. And then you have, I don't have it with me, but we have like the Squiddy WH for $80, and then you have the Squiddy AL for $85. It's like that's a very, very similar price point for two very different things. And I could see somebody being rightfully confused about, oh gosh, which should I get? Especially from a beginner's standpoint that doesn't know all the intricacies that this hobby offers. Because it's not just comparing a spec sheet. This isn't like, here I have two gaming devices here. This is an NVIDIA Shield from 2013. Weird device, I know, but boy, is that a fun one that I've had for 10 years now. But this this can be objectively measured in terms of the type of display and the quality of the display and the amount of RAM that it has and CPU and GPU processing power, and the button layout and the battery life and the size of the battery. All that can be objectively measured, and you can directly compare them in a pretty objective way. And balisongs are just not that. They're just not that. You could even say that about cameras. Cameras have a lot of very some things that are subjective, but you're just looking at the feature set, the compatibility between lenses and batteries and accessories, and the weight of them, and the bit rate they shoot at, and the file formats they can shoot at, the lens compatibility and how that's going to affect what you can shoot and how you can shoot. All those are objectively measurable. Balisongs aren't, oh, this is 4.5 ounces and this is 3.9 ounces and this is stainless steel and this is aluminum, so one of the two is better. That's not really how this works. It comes down to the flipping and what you're actually good at, what kind of tricks you enjoy doing the most. So that's where anything that I've said in this video is all just one man's opinion. So that's where I highly encourage you to seek out other opinions. Go on Discord pages, go on YouTube, go on Instagram. Look in the comment section of this video, because I really want this to be a discussion for people, because I want to know what people think. I want to know, people that own a Vulp and own a Canyon, or you own neither of them, or you own just one of them, which one of these resonates with you now more than the other? Which do you think that you would carry around on a daily basis? Which would you feel more comfortable dropping a ton as a beginner, and maybe you're not too worried about the cosmetic aspect of it and you just want to know which one's more durable, which one stands out to you more? That's what I love about this hobby, is there are so many options. There's so many different things that you can customize. Even with the Vulp, you have blade inserts that you can get from Zippy Balisong. And now even the Canyon has both handle inserts and blade inserts that you can get. That can... I haven't been able to try those. I've tried it with the Vulp, and they're great. And they're awesome with... Like, this is my custom modded Vulp Pro. They're awesome on the Vulp Pro. And so, that could completely change the experience for you. There's just so many different aspects to measure within all of this, that I just highly encourage you to not listen to one single person. Really dig into what most of the community thinks, because that's really what you're going to do. But also, don't sweat too much about it. If you're on that beginner end, or you're just looking for something to flip, like, both of them are going to be completely fine. Anyone who says that the Vulp is absolute trash and it can't do anything and you can't do any tricks with it and it's to this, to that, you should never flip it, it's terrible, it's awful, that is not true. It is just not true. It's also not true about the Canyon. It's also not true about any balisong made by any reputable brand, unless it has some glaring issue, like there's a pivot that is stuck, or a Zen pin fell out, or in this case, I've never been able to replicate it. It's really annoying. People do have, it is ultimately a small group of people, but more people that we would like, that have had their Zen pins fall out on the Vulp. I've never been able to replicate it. Every time we've had to mess with the Zen pins, we have to bash it out with a hammer, which is really annoying. So would that suck if it happened to you? Yes, but they are replaceable by the user, which is important. The Canyon has a pinsless design, and this handle gap has noticeably reduced from the time that we got it initially. And this one has a weird thing where this right handle is pointed more, just in a different direction than the other handle, and it wasn't like that when I first got it. So I think that there are signs that this handle gap is reducing, and the only way that you can fix that is by entirely replacing the handle, which is different than having to replace a tang pin on something like any knife that has a tang pin, or like a Zen pin. Those are easier to replace than having to replace a whole handle. So that is a concern of mine. I'm going to keep flipping this. I've actually been flipping it a little bit more aggressively in my free time than normal just to see, because I want this to be a good option for people that exists for a long time for sure. But if it has a problem with the handle gap reducing over time, like I've even seen people like right out of the box, their handle gap is really, really small. I've seen a couple posts on Reddit about that. Just as I've seen issues with pretty much any balisong. Every company I know has different issues with different things because quality control for these things is just hard. But ultimately, the odds of you having like an absolutely glaring issue from any reputable brand, if you're buying something from BB Barfly, Squid Industries, Nabalis, Machine Wise, Maxace, EPS, Stitch Steel, Zippy Balisong, like so many of the top people, Flip Forge, odds are you're going to be just fine. So that's where I would stress, don't dive too deep into the rabbit hole of what's the absolute perfect one, because at the end of the day, you need to figure out if you even want to stay in this hobby. But anyway, I'm going to stop rambling, because I'm sure this has been like 40 or 50 minutes now of a whole lot of information to dive into. But I think I actually have some notes pulled up. I'm going to make sure that I've covered all my notes, because the previous 2 times I did this, I completely forgot some of the core points that I wanted to make. But right now, I think that I've pretty much covered everything. And I hope this has been informative. I hope it's been helpful. Again, there are going to be people that strongly disagree with me, as there almost always are in any quarter of the internet that I go to. There are even people on some of the biggest like balisong discords where their apparent like core personality trait they have for themselves in the balisong hobby is just exclusively hating the Vulp. They have in their like usernames Vulp hater. So there are going to be people like that in pretty much any corner of the balisong world that just inexplicably just shit on something for absolutely no reason. Or maybe there's some basis for a reason, but most of the time they're just trying to troll people and just trying to shit on it just because they don't like one particular aspect of it, and so therefore they treat it like it's the worst thing in the world. There are people that think that about everything. There are going to be people that think that about the Canyon. There are people that say that about Machine Wise, Squid Industries. Every company, there's going to be some person that they are going to die on the hill if they hate this company, and if you buy anything from them, then you should burn in hell because you're a terrible person and what the fuck is wrong with you. That is a very small vocal minority of the balisong space. Because ultimately, we're all just out here trying to have a good time. I want more options to be available for people because ultimately that's what is going to make this hobby grow. So that's where I'm rooting for the Canyon. And if you've bought one, I think you're going to have a great time with it. But just from my experience, if I had to recommend one, I would give a slight leg up to the Vulp because it feels a lot more familiar to the vast majority of other options that are available. And I feel that starting with this and leading that into other stuff is going to give you an overall better foundation in terms of flipping, even if some of the tricks are a little wonky. Than this will, which also has a little bit of wonkiness and a weirdly annoyingly placed logo, but that's something entirely subjective to me. Maybe just put it in the middle and rotate it. Why is it awkwardly at the bottom there? And that this is awkwardly kind of like at the top. Just that kind of stuff. It doesn't fucking matter. But me being a videographer, I just like when those are going the right way, because getting video of this logo is just going to be weird. Because we do have rough plans to do kind of a full video on that. But please, I want this to be an open discussion. I've been looking at what a lot of people have said. Blade Bias, Ethan at Blade Bias has made a lot of great videos on the Canyon. I highly recommend checking those out. There's been a variety of people in the community that have made videos about it because it's so cheap, and that really excites people that it's even remotely good. And for me, it's a solid 7, 8 out of 10, as is the Vulp. Maybe I'd put that more like 7.5 to 8 out of 10 for me. It's not perfect, but I still enjoy it for what it is, and I still come back to it. And it feels like home to me. I like the feel in the hand. I overall like how it flips. I really enjoy the sound. Because it's got that good clack. Nice good clack. I like me a good Good metallic clack. This ain't clacking. Ain't clacking. But let me know what you think. Really excited to get into conversations with people. And I'm sure my opinions on this stuff will change, as every opinion that I have on every balisong that I have actively changes, because this hobby is rapidly evolving in tons of different ways. But thank you so much for listening if you made it this long. I have a number of ideas for more videos in the future, so I hope that this has been informative. This is Brandon, not willhirsch, but I am destined to create videos for channels that do not have my name on them, and that's okay. But anyway, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Piggity, piggity, peace.